and I hope you have listened to my lecture on neoclassical age, the definition of neoclassical age, and what was the time period that the neoclassical age and who were the popular figures, say in prose, poetry, drama, and all we have seen. So today, let us go to the characteristics or features of the neoclassical poetry. So, with specific reference to neoclassic poetry, we'll see some of the important features of neoclassical poetry. Oh, let me share the screen first. So, coming to the features of the neoclassical poetry, first thing is rationalism. Yesterday itself, we have seen that in the age of neoclassical literature or in the neoclassical period of literature, we have seen that rationalism took place, replacing the Renaissance spirit of free will, freedom of speech, etc. And so, it is the most essential feature of neoclassical poetry, rationality. So, as we have seen yesterday, that man they considered always is a social animal, and so he needs to be tamed with the tools of rationality, reason, logic, etc. And the neoclassical poets viewed reason as the mainspring of learning. So for them, it is not free will, it is not freedom, but it is the reason. So whatever you are learning, whatever is the knowledge you are gaining, it should be based on reason. And of course, this can be attached to the scientific spirit also that was, of course, gearing up during this period. Okay, knowledge and inspiration for their poetry. So their poetry is inspired by the reason, rationality, and they considered these two as mainsprings of learning. The poetry of this age is a reaction against the Renaissance style of poetry. And so it is a unique outcome of intellectuality, not fancy. That means imagination. And if we compare to their predecessors, that is romantic poetry, of course, they both stand contradicting to each other. So, first feature of neoclassical poetry is rationalism, rationality, ration. Everything needs to be grounded with a reason, with some rationality and some logic, because they are the keys for learning. And now, next thing is scholarly allusions, references. Neoclassicism as a period is defined, as we know, is revived interest in the classical literature, and which are considered to be scholarly or great works of the medieval times, or even the old English times, etc. So, the neoclassical poets always love to make use of scholarly allusions, and most all of them are very much highly educated and also well versed in various fields of studies, and they knew a lot about religious, biblical, and classical literature. That is why they always are interested to refer to some scholarly allusions. Allusions helped them to convey their message. Why there is a need for any allusion? When we want to say something, if you say it directly, it may not be that much effective. If you say it with some allusions, with reference to something like, example or anecdotes, etc., you all know that that will be very effective to the listeners or readers also. So their aim in using scholarly allusions was to make their poetry very effective. And one more thing is they wanted to convey a message. This is always there, the neoclassic poetry. They never considered art for art's sake, but art is for the didactic purposes, moral purposes. So that means any piece of literature should be able to convey some kind of message. Whether it will impress us with its lyricism or musical quality or its imagery, etc., is a different matter. But for them, what is more important is a piece of literature should be able to convey a message. That is why in this period, the genre of essay was also very popular. There was the habit of writing pamphlets or writing articles. You have Steele and Edison who wrote, who run actually some magazines, okay, like journals with articles. And Pope, who is our poet, he also wrote, okay, some articles. So, referring to some scholarly allusions, previous scholars, references from scholars, classics, classic literature like Horace, Virgil, Greek literature, Latin literature, or even to other philosophers, etc., is the order of the day during the neoclassical era. So that was only an attempt made by them to make their message very effective. And we have many such allusions in the Rape of the Lock, which was written by Alexander Pope, which we will be reading. And then coming to the third feature of neoclassical literature is didacticism. What is the meaning of didacticism? Didactic means moralistic, or we can say religious also. So, neoclassical poets actually rebelled against the nature of Renaissance period poetry. So they never bothered to convey some didactic message. Okay, and as you know, I told you, romantic poets, of course, who are their predecessors, they actually try to develop the kind of belief that art is for only arts, not for any didactic purposes. But the neoclassical poets, of course, they felt that it is for the didacticism, that is the moral preaching, the religious preaching, because they believed that man should be disciplined because man is a social animal. So, in order to put man in the discipline, you need some kinds of preachings, and the literature is the vehicle of that preaching, that moral, that message, etc. The poets of this era or the writers of this era endeavored effort, put their efforts very hardly to teach the troubles of humanity. So they believed in the magical power of poetry in order to teach, okay, the teach to the humanity how to face troubles and how to derive inspiration from the moral teachings or preachings, etc. Okay, so the third feature of the neoclassical poetry is didacticism. And next we have realism. So it is the hallmark of neoclassical poetry. So hallmark, that means the brand. Okay. So all neoclassical poetry is based upon realism, not imagination. We will get the realistic situations which are explained in poetry. If you refer to the rape of the lock also, it is a realistic, it is based upon a realistic situation. That is a quarrel between two families because of a young man and young women who entered into a quarrel. So the whole poem is based on the realistic aspect, of course, into which Pope brings a kind of supernatural elements, etc. That is a different thing. But the whole basis is the realistic, um, real incident that took place in his neighborhood. And when one of his friends asks him to settle the issue between the families by writing some kind of um, you know, humorous account of the incident that took place, it happened. So when we come to the poetry, we will see whether it could settle the issues or not. That is a very different thing. But I'm giving here as an example that the neoclassical poetry is based on realism. And all the neoclassical writers were hard realists, and they presented the true picture of their society. Whatever is the picture that is there in the society. See, degrading morals and the situation of women, the situation of middle class people, the situation or the conditions of poor people, and agricultural communities or labor communities, industrialized communities, etc. And also, what were the prevailing economic, political, social situations? All those we will get in the works of neoclassical poetry. As we know that literature is the production of the society, and 100% many of the writers of this period actually have attempted to present the harsh realities of the life in their contemporary society. And they were keen observers and dwelt upon what they experienced with their open eyes in their poetry. So, very keen observation of men and women, their work, their manners, their behavior, their characters, and their speech, and their habits, their customs, etc. We will see in the literature of the neoclassical period. And of course, the poetry, the poem which we are going to deal with, that is the Rape of the Lock, also presents the keen observation of Alexander Pope very much. So when we read, we can notice this quality of realism very much in the Alexander Pope's Rape of the Lock. These neoclassical poets are much occupied with the harsh realities of life, and actually the favorite genre was satire. Satire is writing an account with a severe criticism, of course aiming at the Reformation, say through didactic speeches or preachings, etc. And so whatever is happening in the society, they have taken up and they have shown that in their literature. Neoclassical poets were considered to be men of action, and they practically lived in the midst of people. So, among the people where in the society where they were living, what is the life, what is it going on, etc., was observed very keenly, and that is what is presented in the neoclassic neoclassical poetry. Then, writing in the heroic couplet is the main feature of neoclassical poetry. Here you can go back to Milton, who declared that he is not intended to write in the heroic couplet. And he actually advocated for the blank verse, which is an advocacy of freedom. And he himself declared that he wanted to free poetry from the bondage of, writing in the rhyme, etc. And couplets are rhyming lines, and of course it is very difficult also. But all neoclassic poets mostly wrote in heroic couplets only, and they were actually primarily responsible for the reputation of heroic couplet. So in during this period only, heroic couplet became very popular in the English literature. And we have Dryden and Pope. And of these two also, Pope is considered to be the master of heroic couplet. And of course, heroic couplet is used by Chaucer also, but it was perfected, and of course it was made popular through many other poets in the neoclassical period. Yet Dryden and Pope are the two who are very exclusive in the use of this heroic couplet. And Pope is the master of heroic couplet because he actually adopted the form and perfected the form. Now, many critics say that using this heroic couplet is like having a, developing your body so to fit into a ready-made dress. Here the body is the theme or subject of the poem. Depending on the subject of the poem, actually the form can be altered or changed, but they didn't do that. Rather, they fixed the form, and whatever is the subject, they try to actually creep into that form. So the subject is made to creep into the form, that is the shape, the outer shape is very neat. When we read Pope's Rape of the Lock, we can understand how neatly it is like dressed with equal syllables, equal length of lines, etc. And nowhere you will miss the rhyme and all these things. So neoclassical poets have developed a fascination for a heroic couplet, and that is the age in which heroic couplet is very, very vibrant, and of course they have perfected the form also, especially Dryden and Pope is the master of heroic couplet. Okay. The next characteristic or feature of neoclassical poetry is lyricism, absence of lyricism. So no passionate lyricism, because they felt that poetry is not subjective, poetry is objective. So they never felt that poetry is a place where you can express your personal passions, feelings, and emotions. This we can see, of course, in the previous poets we have read Milton, Shakespeare, Spenser, and to some extent Chaucer also we can see. But it is a contradictory picture that you will get in the neoclassical literature, because there is no passionate lyricism, and they never try to put forth or pour out their own personal feelings in their poems, because a work of literature is always considered to as a tool of reformation or a tool of change, a tool of didactic message, and it is for the reformation of the man, or to discipline the man who is a social animal. So they never considered that it should be filled with emotions and feelings. So to some extent we may get, but not lyricism will not dominate. The passions will not dominate the neoclassical poetry. They looked at the passion with distrust and suspicion. So for them, the passion is very destructive and suspicious. And of course, because they are more in favor of rationality, reason, reality. So then, of course, passion, lyricism, emotion, feelings, of course, will play a lower tone, or they will not be very much evident in this poetry. And that is why they did not give free play to their imagination. So you don't find a free play of imagination, but here and there you will get the tinge of imagination will be there. Anyhow, literature, of course, is fictitious, we consider. So there may not be a complete absence of imagination, but it is only to say that, like the romantics or other poets of other age, they never reveled in imagination. That means they never celebrated imagination, but they actually put these emotions, feelings, imaginations at a hand away, and they dwelt more on the intellectual aspects of poetry. And some of these qualities, of course, we will see in the Rape of the Lock that is prescribed for your study. And lastly, I will refer to one more important feature, that is objectivity. It is, as I have already referred to it, to know they always treated poetry very objectively. It is not subjective. That means it is not for personal interest and for narrating our personal emotions, etc. So these actually, they are against the subjectivity in poetry, and always they strove to be objective while writing poetry. They actually avoided giving vent to their feelings, but rather they dwelt upon the miseries, hardships, and problems of the people around them. And of course, the hypocrisy of people also. As I told you, the shallow morality of the neoclassical society is also taken up by these poets, as they are revealing the reality, the miserable reality, harsh reality, hardships, miseries, and problems of the people. Of course, we will see a kind of objectivity prevailing in the poems of um, neoclassical poets. So that is the reason we may not be able to guess much of the personality or the lives of the neoclassical poets looking into their poetry. By reading their poetry, we may not be able to guess the personality of the neoclassical poetry. This is what I have to share regarding the features of neoclassical poetry, the characteristics of neoclassical poetry. These are very important because you may get a question um, to consider Rape of the Lock as a neoclassical poem, or to write an essay about Alexander Pope as a neoclassical poet. When this such type of question is asked, of course, you have to mention all these features and then explain one after the other how this feature can be traced out in the poem prescribed for your study, and of course, how Pope, as a poet, handles these features in his poems. So, for this reason, they are very important, and you have to make a note of them, and you have to elaborate on your own with reference to the poet as well as the poem. So, after this, I just want to share one more document that is about the introduction to the poet, that is Alexander Pope. See, he is the Alexander Pope, the man who is having very, what do you say, eyes and a pinpointed nose. Of course, he is a hunchback, a man with hunchback. Because of health reasons, he was a very short man, okay, very lean, and with a bent in on his back because of his spinal problems. But though small, is a very powerful man in who shaped a kind of history of English literature, especially during the neoclassical period, and who is a master of heroic couplet and also a great satirist. Okay, and you can see he is his life period, that is to the closure of 17th century until the middle of the 18th century. He was there, born near London, and became a great poet and satirist in English literature during the Augustan period, English Augustan period. Okay. Then, actually, to know about his familial background, Pope's father is a linen merchant, and he retired from that business and went to London, a place called Winfield, okay, um, where they used to live in the Roman Catholic neighborhood, where they got so many good friends among the families, and Pope also got good friends like John Carlyle, Martha Blount, okay, and others. Um, and he actually, his Catholic background was a, an obstacle to procure a university education, because during that period, I think of Mary, Catholics are not permitted to be in the universities, and that is for the Protestantism or Anglican Church, where Catholics are not permitted to get educated in the university. So it so happened that Pope is educated with the help of some tutors at home itself, and he started reading Greek, Latin, French, and Italian also. Then he, from the very childhood, started scribbling, started writing, and imitating the verse of the poets whom he read. He was a voracious reader from the childhood itself. The best of these early writings are Ode on Solitude and a paraphrase of St. Thomas A. Kempis, both of which he claimed to have written at the age of 12. See, at the age of 12, he wrote poetry. He started writing poetry. So you can imagine his greatness as a poet, which was blooming from the very childhood, from his very childhood. Coming to his early works, what early works he wrote. In his early days, actually, he made friendship with so many great writers: William Wycherley, William Walsh, Henry Cromwell, um, you know, with the former members of John Dryden's circle, and also with his scholarly circle, actually, by 1705. Okay, he composed his pastorals. Okay, and his ability as a poet was recognized by one of the leading publishers, Jacob Tonson, and some of his poems were included in the Poetical Miscellanies that was published in 1709 itself. Okay. actually, how come so early he was into very much reading, writing, etc.? This is due to his ill health only. So, ill health did not permit Pope to lead a what do you say, normal life of a child, you know. He could not go out, or he was not allowed to ride on horses, not much allowed to play with his fellow kids, etc., because of his disease, because he was affected with a kind of tubercular infection, okay, where actually he tried to just a minute. Hello, చెప్పండి. ఇచ్చేయి బాబు పైన. So we have to see how his ill health could not permit him his normal childhood activities. So all this energy was transformed or put in another field, that is his writing. So he was a lifelong sufferer from headaches, body pains, deformity, very sensitive physical and mental pain, etc. In spite of his physical debility, weakness, he became a great writer. So his physical debility, of course, facilitated Pope to develop a bent for reading, and then starting to write at a very early age, while the children of his age were playing, okay, and busy with their physical activities. He usually confined himself to the reading sessions, and then he developed his creative, okay, poetic abilities. So, when Pastorals was published, he was already working on a poem, which is another poem, a poem on the art of writing. So, the art of writing, 1711. Okay, 1711 means how many years? It is 12 and 11. That means 23, hardly 23 years. At that time, he started writing on the art of writing, which is an essay on criticism. This is a very great work of Pope, that is published in 1711. And he actually polished many epigrams like "A little learning is a dangerous thing, to err is human, to forgive divine, for fools rush in where angels fear to tread," etc. These are the proverbial heritage of the language, though they are traced to the original sources of Horace, Quintilian, and other critics of ancient and modern period. Because of his voracious reading only, he could get that knowledge, and by the age of 23 itself, he produced this wonderful essay on criticism, an essay on criticism which talks about the art of writing, and he has given us a heritage, proverbial heritage of the language. So we have some more things that we can discuss, okay, regarding this. This essay on criticism, of course, was a successful publication. It brought much fame to Pope, and also it made notable friendships to Pope with Richard Steele and Joseph Edison, who were actually collaborating on the Spectator, the journal. And Pope also contributed one most important, um, you know, article, The Messiah, and some other papers in prose. Okay. Pope was also influenced by the Spectator's policy of correcting public morals by witty admonishment. So the Spectator was established by, actually started by Steele and Edison with an aim of reforming the public or people. They wanted to imbibe some, some moral qualities with a combination of wit and humor. Okay. Humor means you can say low level. Wit is humor combined with knowledge. Okay. Very high levels of humor you can think. And in this vein, he wrote the first version of his mock epic, The Rape of the Lock, when he actually became popular with the essay on criticism and also his article in the Journal of the Spectator, and where he liked the policy of propagating the morals through a humorous account or witty account, wherein it is like chiding the people for having some small or big immoral qualities, okay, or hypocritic qualities. Okay, so that is what influenced him to publish the first version of the mock epic also in 1712, and it was published only in 2 cantos at that time. And later in 1714, he added 3 more, and that was 5 cantos. And this, as I have already told you, is written to reconcile two Catholic families. So this is how the Rape of the Lock was published. So we have some more lines which we can know about the Pope as a poet. We will discuss this in the next class, and perhaps if possible I may start the text also. Okay. Have a nice time. I will close the Yeah, hope you are listening regularly and try to listen because the cases are now in the decreasing mode. Your exams may happen, say, in the month of June, etc. So don't neglect if you have stopped preparing for whatever reasons it is. You please renew your preparation. Okay, have a nice time.